welcome to another historical fiction author chat. And I'm very excited to welcome to the stage Cece or Chris Humphreys. Welcome, Chris.
Hello, hello. Good morning, everyone. Hi.
Morning. I'm very excited. I can't show you the cover of this book that we're going to talk about because I didn't get to read it, but Chris has it. Isn't that pretty? Love that cover. And the first one of his that I read was this one a while ago, early 2000s, right? Was that one?
I think 2004 or 5, probably. Yeah.
It's so
Gosh,
great.
long time.
So I know time flies, doesn't it? All right, I will read you Chris's bio. As I said, you'll see on the books, it says C.C. Humphreys, but now you know the secret is that he's Chris. And I will read you his bio now. Chris Humphreys is a best-selling author, an actor, and a swordsman. He was born in Toronto and grew up in the UK, very much like his character Billy Coke in this book we're going to talk about. He has performed as an actor on stages all over the world, ranging from London's West End to Hollywood's 20th Century Fox, in roles ranging from Hamlet to Jack Absolute to Clive Parnell on Coronation Street. His books have been published in more than 10 languages and have won numerous awards. Someday I'll Find You is Chris's 22nd novel. He lives in Salt Spring Island in BC with his partner Kat, who is a bookstore owner. Exciting. Okay, now I'm going to read you the synopsis, and I have to tell you that this was the best book I've read in so long. It was so swoony and so exciting, and I just want everyone to pre-order it and love it. All right, so I'm going to read you the synopsis now. For readers of the Nightingale and Lilac Girls, so you know already that it's going to be something that you love. A dazzling novel about Ilse, a spy, and Billy, a pilot, who fall in love but are wrenched apart during World War II and must find their way back to each other. When Billy Coke steps onto the streets of London one December evening in 1940, he has no idea he is stepping to his fate. As Hitler's bombers come close to burning the city down, Billy meets the woman who will change the course of his life, Ilse Magnusson, a musician from Norway, but also something more, a spy in training. Escaping the Blitz for 3 days, she and Billy drive, quarrel, conceal, reveal, and finally, fully fall in love. Now they must part, each to fight the war their own way. Billy, a Canadian Spitfire pilot, to duel with the Luftwaffe over North Africa and the Mediterranean. Ilse to return to her conquered country, ingratiate herself with the Nazi elite, which includes her beloved father, and send vital intelligence back to Britain. They know that the odds of both of them surviving are poor. All they can hope is that the other does survive and that someday they find each other again. From decadent pre-war Berlin to the atrocity at Guernica, from dogfights in Sicily to an Oslo ground under the German jackboot, through small victories and bitter losses, this is the story of a man and a woman at war. A tale of causes and compromises, heroism and betrayal, of choices made with consequences unforeseen, and finally, how sometimes love can give you a second chance. I'm going to tell you what I wrote because I did a little review. I said it was an absolutely wonderful read, rich with fascinating historical gems, driven by fast-paced adventures and intrigue that held me spellbound the entire way through, and it is so romantic. So that's my intro for Chris. Yeah, nothing big for you to follow up on or anything there. I'll just disappear now, and I'm going to hand it over to you to read your chapter. Thank you.
Great. Well, hello, and thanks, Genevieve. That was a lovely intro, and I'm so pleased you love the book. It's definitely one from the heart, this, because it is at least partly based on my parents. This is the story I suppose I was destined to write eventually, because my dad was a fighter pilot, Battle of Britain fighter pilot, and North Africa. And my mother was a Norwegian spy. So their story is fascinating, somewhat different from the story I tell in this book. But I found that I was almost being with them again, understanding much more of what they'd gone through. It gave me a whole new perspective on who they were and who the people I knew. I'm going to read you a little bit from the very beginning, so it doesn't need a lot of explanation. As Genevieve said with the blurb on the back cover there, they meet on what was actually the worst day, I mean, of many bad days of the Blitz, in the German air campaign against Britain, the bombing campaign. This was one of the worst because Hitler actually tried to burn London down, and it was mainly an incendiary raid. And this night was known as the Second Great Fire of London, which is interesting because, of course, I wrote about the First Great Fire of London in my novel Fire. I chose it because it was obviously going to be a dramatic backdrop to a meeting, and the book is partly about fate, which explains this first sentence I'm going to read, but because of the fate of people destined to meet, destined to part, hopefully destined to meet again. But in this bit, we don't know much about Ilse other than what we discover now, so I don't really need to explain much. As it happens, Ilse Magnusson was also thinking of fate just before the bombs started to fall. She'd been led there by a complex trail of thoughts, almost as complex as the music she was playing in the church of St. Giles without Cripplegate. The building itself had started her down the trail when the man who'd brought her to it, Petter, had excitedly shown her around. And this is the tomb of the English poet, John Milton, he'd said. Do you know him? I do. She did. Her father, Wilhelm Magnusson, was obsessed by poetry, and Milton was a favourite, only one rank below the incomparable Goethe. So when she looked at the tomb, a quote came easily to her in her father's voice. "Necessity and chance approach not me, and what I will is fate." She spoke the words only in her head. She really did not know so much about this Petter, only that he was 35 years old, that he had fled Czechoslovakia a week before the Germans invaded, and that he played the viola. They'd shared a table at the Lion's Corner House by Charing Cross, and when he discovered that she was a flautist, he'd invited her to play in this church with him, another exile on violin, and the church's rector on cello. She recognized that he desired her, and since she thought it a possibility she might sleep with him, part of her restraint in not quoting Milton aloud was that she found a lot of men were frightened by her intellect. If she did decide to take him as a lover, the last thing she'd want him to be was frightened. The main part of her restraint, though, was the memory Milton had brought of her father, whom she had not seen in 3 years, but whom she might be fated to see soon enough in their hometown of Oslo, if, as in Paradise Lost, necessity and chance did not approach, and she kept exerting her will. She would always love her father, but he had become her enemy, though he did not know that yet, and with fortune would not for many years. As soon as she saw him, she would lie to him. It would pain her to do so, even though it was vital that she did. It was a relief to escape such thoughts in music. It had been a long while since she'd played with others, yet if she'd been a little nervous, so had they. The priest, complete with collar and robe, was named Sandy, and proved solid, if uninspired, on the cello. Petter was a good viola player, while his friend, a Slovak called Janos, who had no English, was an excellent violinist. So good, in fact, that Ilse was sure he was, like her, a professional, and that he probably resented having to play second violin, for, of course, the flute replaced the first violin in a flute quartet. It put extra pressure on her, which pleased her, as she brought metal to lips for the first time. The best quartets took years to coalesce, but the 4 of them did well enough. They eased into it with some Haydn. Yet in a London where death came for some each night from the skies, she discovered that people chose to move quite swiftly to their greatest pleasures. One reason she was even considering Petter as a lover. It was Janos who suggested the next piece, grunting it in German at Petter. She spoke the language fluently, even better than she did English. But her handlers, those who were so carefully considering her fate, had urged her to cultivate the habit of revealing almost nothing about herself in any circumstance. She practiced that now, looking both surprised, which she wasn't, and pleased, which she was, when Petter translated. Janosch has suggested Mozart, Flute Quartet number 1, D major. Shall we? Petter had known where this would lead. He'd brought the music for the 4 parts in a battered leather portmanteau. He produced them now, and they arranged the sheets on their music stands. As Janosch counted them in, he lifted his eyebrows, looking straight at her. It was a challenge. She took it up joyfully. She was fair on the allegro, but on the adagio she soared, along with her notes, which rose in the glorious acoustics created by the ribbed vaulting of the church's ceiling. Though each movement highlighted her instrument, it was a flute quartet after all. The adagio had only the violin underneath it, which was not even bowed, but plucked. There was another reason she loved the piece. It was based on an old troubadour song, the pinnacle of medieval romance, perfect for this setting. Yet now, even as she took the music and let it take her, she recalled that troubadours sang of an ultimate love that was, at its heart, unattainable, unfulfilled, unrequited. And so, when she glanced again into the yearning eyes of Petter, she knew suddenly that his love would remain all of those. It was neither her fate nor his, she decided, for them to be lovers. Or maybe, she thought with an inward smile, it was Mozart who had decided for both of them. So caught up was she in her thoughts, in the music, that she was the last to hear the sirens. She became aware only when Janosch stopped plucking and Sandy stood up. "Air raid," he said, unnecessarily. "You must all go to the crypt." They'd been playing right in the centre of the nave, and she walked quickly to the entrance of the church under the tower, where Sandy re-emerged with a metal helmet and an ARP armband. "Swiftly all, I must get to my post and watch for incendiaries." The crypt, is it good?" Petter asked, his Adam's apple bobbing. "This church, sir, survived the Great Fire of London in 1666, Sandy said, firmly ushering them towards the altar and the steps down behind it. "I doubt that Herr Hitler will have any more success now than the devil did then." They collected their instruments, moved down the nave. It was when Ilse was at the head of the stairs that she remembered something. It froze her, and she stopped. "I must go," she said, turning back. "No," Petter took her arm. "Do not hear that." That was the ack, ack, ack of the anti-aircraft battery starting up. It was one of the worst sounds in the world, remorseless, relentless, a drill bit driven into the brain. "I hear it," replied Ilse, laying her hand on top of his. "Yet I must go." "Where, for God's sake?" "To my hostel." She raised her voice above siren and gun noise to still his protests. "It is close. It will take me no time. Listen, the bombs are not falling yet." He swallowed. "I come with you." "No," she said, sharper than she meant, lifting his hand away, then continued, softer. "It is my mistake. No need for both of us to risk it. Besides," she smiled, squeezed his hand, released it. "It is the Young Women's Christian Association hostel. They will not allow a man into their shelter. Not even Herr Hitler could make them." She moved away fast down the nave to the church door. "Mistake," she heard him call, but she lost his other words to the racket, which, as she stepped outside, went up so many decibels she ducked, stopped, suddenly hesitant. Her instructors at the Special Operations Executive had given her a Morse code textbook to study in case they accepted her for training. They told her that it must never be out of her sight. "Hold it closer than any lover in the night," they'd advised. "Bite the hand off anyone who tries to touch it." She'd put the book beside her flute to bring with her to the church, but she'd picked up the one and not the other. Everything SOE did was a test. If the hostel took a hit or was partly burned out and the book lost, so was her career as a spy. She'd never be able to return to Norway to fight the Nazis. Clutching her flute case tight to her chest, she set out, bending into the raid roar as if into a strong wind. A dozen paces, and she heard them, incendiary bombs falling, hitting the roofs of buildings, puncturing some and glancing off the sloping tiles of others to skitter down to the pavement. One exploded 3 paces in front of her. The bomb itself was small, 1 foot long, 2 circled hands wide, but it threw out an impressive fountaining of sparks in a 10-foot radius. Some landed on her foot, and she paused to rub the glow off with the sole of her other shoe. It would be a minute or so before the bomb would burn at its most intense. 2,200 degrees Celsius, she'd been told. But since this one had landed on stone, it should burn itself out quite fast. Milton, she thought, as she started running again, was both right and wrong. Sometimes necessity and chance approach whether you want them to or not. And my fate is no longer entirely in my own hands.
Oh, that's so good. Except, you know what? I'm dying for the next chapter. Hang on. I love that. You can just see everything in there. It's so exciting. And you know, I did not know about incendiary bombs. I'm certain that I should, but I didn't know that. So
I didn't either. You know, the wonderful thing for a present day author is that Google is our friend. You know, and so if you're starting to write about incendiaries, you know, rather than have the endless reference books, which I also tend to have. I mean, I read a ton. You can see in the bibliography at the end of my book how much I do all that background, but suddenly, you know, at what temperature does an incendiary burn? 2,200 degrees Celsius. There we go.
that was great. And
How much is the price of a pint in a pub in London in 1940? It's 2 and 6pence. Great.
I've just been doing that kind of research myself, and the way you measured it out, what was it? 2 circle hands? Is that what you said? A foot long?
Yeah, that's right. Just like that. 2 circled hands. It's only about that big.
Okay. Oh wow. Yeah, historical fiction is great. You get to have so much learning, and it's a gift. I was just talking about this with somebody else about how not to do an info dump. It's because we learn so much stuff, and it's so easy to just show off and put everything out there,
Oh,
but it takes everything away from.
yeah, absolutely. No, my friend Diana Gabaldon, to drop a name, but she and I have taught some of these classes. We've taught some writing classes together, but one of them is on research, because of course that's one of the first questions people ask when they're writing, particularly historical fiction, though it applies to so many genres. And she calls the info dump. When you get to a point in the book where the author is obviously saying, well, I've suffered with my research, now it's your turn. Which is so true, you know, and suddenly you get 2 pages of facts. And I always say that a fact is only useful if it's part of the flow of the story, if it's something related to the character. You know, in this case, she would come up with that because she's super smart, and we need to know how smart she is. She's not only a musician or whatever. So, you know, and it's the sort of thing that goes through someone's head, perhaps, as they're running through the streets and sees this bomb. So, yeah, it's you've got to, as you say, you've got to be very careful with info, because fascinating though it might be to you, if it gets in the way of the story, then you know, you're not writing a novel anymore. So.
Exactly. It takes away the characters. It just dumps what you've learned. So yeah. And speaking of which, your research, I was certain that you were a pilot. You were a spy, you were a mechanic, you were all of those things. And I was certain that when we did speak, then you would tell me, you know, how many years you'd been a pilot and all that. And so then I read on, and that's not true. So you have to tell me, do you have like years of experts that you've built up? Like, do you have all this? Yeah, you've got.
Well, you know, it's a combination of things. I mean, it's definitely talking to experts, and it's definitely doing all the book research. There's always some amazing books, and I usually find there's 1 or 2 key books in any of the novels I've written, key research books that you find that are the ones that really sum it up. And I found 2, well, possibly 3 for this one, actually. One was the inside story of SOE, the Special Operations Executive. So that really helped me with all the spy stuff. A second was a book called All the Fine Young Eagles, which is the history of Canadian fighter pilots at war. And the verbatim reports of what it was like to fly a Spitfire in a dogfight was extraordinary. And the third was something I thought I'd do a bit of show and tell here. The third, and I'm going to come back to experts as well in a second, but the third was my father's actual flying log.
Oh, wow.
This is the book that every pilot gets. It's their, their journal. They have to note down every single flight they take, and what it was for. So I mean, I can just open it to any page. So, and I know that say oh well, this is a famous page, because this is the page. I don't know how much of that you can see, but it's the date is on the extreme left there. The plane he flew, the Hurricane, is there. Who was flying? Was it just himself? Yes, solo. And it was a scramble, is what you see there, which means they were up fighting. This is in North Africa, in Libya, outside Tobruk. And then the writing on that edge this is the most dramatic page in the whole journal, which is Mr. 109, which means he shot at but missed Messerschmitt, hit in glycol by a 109 who chased him home, and he was chased home by 4 and a 110. So he was very lucky to make it out. And I used that absolute sequence of in Billy's experience in Sicily. So he was posted off ops for a little bit there, because it was obviously a great shock to the system. One of those things when you read about, when you do the research, I was saying earlier about how you learn to reevaluate your parents in a different way. And you think my father was a bit of because he was a storyteller, an actor, and a writer himself. He would just, oh yes, I'll tell this story about being shot down by Messerschmitts. Ho ho ho. Must have been absolutely terrifying, and the sort of hidden consequences of that. The PTSD would have accompanied him all his life, and explained some of his slightly more erratic behavior. I mean, he was a great guy in lots of ways, but there were definite things he did that could be explained perhaps by some of his war experiences. Before I forget, I must just say one last thing about people. I'm really lucky because my niece, my brother's sister, is married to one of Canada's astronauts.
Oh.
In Houston. His name's Joshua Kutrick. He's a colonel in the RCAF and a fighter pilot. So I just ran stuff by him all the time. And I mean, I know far more about strafing and low-level bomb runs than I really probably need to. But again, it's in the book to give it the other thing about research is that it sets the context for. You have to get a certain amount in, because then we understand the context of why the character is making these choices. Mm-hmm. And so the quite detailed the dogfight with the Germans and the Italians over Sicily. It's quite detailed, but also obviously completely comprehensible. You don't want to write jargon, but it has to build that the context of it builds the terror and why Billy makes the choices he does.
Yeah, and when you were talking about in that chapter, that scene is amazing. You start talking about which planes they were, and you bring up the Messerschmitts. I can never say that properly, but
Messerschmitt, yes.
Messerschmitts. And we have, well, not everybody, but we as historical fiction readers have probably seen that, and we know of the reputation, just as we know of the reputation of the Hurricanes and the Spitfires. But brought in all the technical stuff of why those are the most feared planes, why they shot down the most, and it just brought that whole thing to life. It was very exciting. I did a little research on Sicily once for the Forgotten Home Child, and I know when the Canadians came in, and these were not the pilots, but the men that came in off the ships, and how the Germans feared our men. They called them the mountain boys, because we had some snipers up there. So I love when you bring in the Canadian voices from it, and I can't even imagine having the treasures that you have. Your dad's logbook, that is the coolest thing. That is so
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Every flight he took from the first, he volunteered 6 months before war came because he knew war was coming. And he told me, he said, I was damned if I was going to get shot in a trench. Um, Plus, he was an actor, and he had an eye already for the the great uniform and being a flyboy, being a glory boy. So he signed up, did some training, 6 weeks training, and then they called him up, sometime later to go into fighter training. So
It's amazing that you had to wait till this point in your life to write it, because that all of that is so exciting to me. Okay, and the other side of it, Ilse. So you launched right off with the music, and I'm a musician, and I pick up everything, and I'm loving it, the Mozart, and I played the oboe, so I've sat beside many a flautist, and I was wondering,
ah,
was your mom also a musician?
no, not at all,
So
not
was
at all. I'm sorry.
you? Because you have all these other things you did or do.
No, I would never call myself a musician. I played the guitar fairly poorly. I bizarrely, I played the piano as a child, and I can't understand that I actually sat up on a stage and played Mozart for people because I have no clue how I did that now. Because I can barely read music now, but I did. I studied the piano for about 6, 7 years. It is not my forte. And so I was really lucky. Again, you go to the experts. There's a man who sometimes lives on Salt Spring. Well, his parents live here, and he visits. Called George Crotty, and he's a top cellist, trained at the Berklee School in Boston. But he was the one. I mean, he's mainly a jazz cellist, to be honest. But he was the one who gave me. We'd go for walks, and I'd say, "So listen," and I'd run stuff by him, conversations that musicians might have to try to make it more, rather than, there's an argument that the guy I call the good German, and he's a former violinist. He's lost his arm, so he can't play anymore. But he loves Mozart, and she loves Bach. And they have this argument about, and I ran that by George. Said, look, and he said, "Oh, you might just change this bit," So that was great. I mean, with that, what I love, and I know you do as well, Genevieve, when you're researching your novels, is learning whole new areas of life, filling in the gaps, and so I embarked on a study of classical music, which I was lamentably poor on, and not all of it, but as it related. And I've actually built a playlist, which I think I will release simultaneously with the book on Spotify, which is the playlist of what they're playing when, that Mozart in D major flute quartet, and she plays at different points. She plays some Grieg, she plays some Boccherini, who wrote a lot for the flute, and then of course Billy Koch, who we're going to meet, the other co-protagonist, the fighter pilot, is an actor like my dad was, is a singer not like my dad was. My dad sounded like a corncrake, and but Billy's a really good light singer, not an operatic, but an actor. He plays in the light musicals, and so that's
He was a real
what's
ham.
that?
He was a ham.
Well, my dad or Billy? No, but Billy loves to sing. He's got a beautiful voice. And it's funny because I was just talking to the audio book people. I'm going to be recording the audio book of this quite shortly, and I said to them, so look, I can hold a tune. I mean, I've appeared in a musical in the West End. I can carry a tune, but I ain't no singer really. So when you'll just have to imagine that the notes are being sung much more beautifully than I'm singing them when I do the audiobook.
Oh, so they are going to have you sing. They
Oh,
won't
yeah,
have.
I have to. Yeah.
Wow, good for you. That's exciting. Um, the way you wrote Ilse was beautiful, bang on. And I often get asked which is easier or more challenging to write, the male or the female. Do you have a favorite that you like to write? Is one that you're more comfortable?
It's a very good question. I don't actually. I'm always flattered, or gratified, perhaps is a better word, when my women readers say, you like you just said about Ilse, that you really did get her. I've always written strong women into my books, or all kinds of women, as I've written all kinds of men, and a number of my books have had a female lead character. In this book, she's a co-protagonist.
Right.
But there have been some books like Hunt of the Unicorn where it's featured from the point of view of a woman. Chasing the Wind, my sort of previous book to this, was about 1936 aviatrix called Roxy Lohan, and she's tough as nails, flyer, chain smoking, tough gal. But that was all from her point of view. So I for me, it's all about character. And once I've got the character, once the character's voice is speaking to me, I find but either as easy and as difficult, because we know writing can be difficult as well, as anyone else. Yeah.
Well, I did want to ask you that because, as you and I noticed before, when you go to my website and there's the list of recommended reads, the books that I love, I believe you are the first male author on there, and I know you are the first male author to be one of these interviews. So, I thought I better touch on that. It's interesting.
Oh.
I guess a lot of my peers are women, or the ones that my publisher works with, or I don't know, but I read mostly women's work. So it was fascinating reading yours. I loved it.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, in regards to Ilse, as I said earlier on, I did feel that I got to revisit my parents in a way. I mean, my dad died 40 years ago, so he was really quite young still. And my mum only 12 years ago. She died at 98. Still strong, vibrant Norwegian woman,
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because my partner Kat, who owns the bookstore here on Salt Spring Island, Black Sheep Books, she said I really felt, because she read actually quite an early draft of this book, but she said I really felt I got to know your mum, and I do feel that Ilse, even though a lot of what she does as a spy is different from what my mother did as a spy,
Mm-hmm.
there were some similarities. But the attitude to life, and how she related to people was interesting, and kind of, because as children we often shy away from the fact that our parents were, of course, the fact that we're here shows it, sexual beings.
Mm-hmm.
And so to contemplate my mother and my father being in that sort of rhapsodic love, which is partly expressed through sexuality, was interesting. I wasn't thinking, oh, this is my mum and father doing this, because the characters aren't my mum and father.
Right.
But there's an element of them, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
and their attitudes, like I think, yeah, I mean, that in that little passage I read, this woman is quite forthright about the fact that she actually enjoys sex, and maybe she'll have it with this Czech guy, right? And then decides no because of Mozart. I have to say that was one of those wonderful research chains of events that you just, I'm sure you have them as well. You just go, oh, that's nice. I was writing it and I thought, I was doing my research, listening to the Mozart. Oh, it's based on a troubadour song. I remember about troubadours. It's courtly love. It's unrequited love. That's why she shouldn't sleep with him, and I was just writing it all down. It was great.
I love that train of thought. You'd never know. And when the characters just speak up, you probably didn't expect Elsa to be quite so forthright in some of those things, but she
No, I
got.
didn't. I didn't at all. No, and it's great because you think, okay, that's who you are, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your friend Diana Gabaldon, and an icon of the whole genre. She was the one that I heard her say at first, that when you are learning how to write, you just have to let the characters do it for you. You just kind of have to be the medium. And I thought that was the craziest thing ever. When I first tried it, I sat down and went, okay, I hear nothing. And then the
Yeah.
more you can relax and learn, there they are. And it
Yeah.
must have been really neat for you having those kind of voices and knowing that they were descended in a way from your parents. That's pretty.
Yeah, it was. It was very interesting. It was very interesting. As I say, as we've said, they're not my parents, but their story is different. But there's enough elements that they share, and as I say, particularly some of the experiences, because like Diana says about letting your characters sort of lead you and reveal who they are. That's the essence of what I do, and it's what I teach as well, because I teach writing quite a bit these days, or intermittently, not in any specific place, but workshops and stuff. And that's what I emphasize is your character in action, character doing stuff. If you just get them doing stuff, how they react to circumstance will kind of reveal to you who they are.
Exactly.
And it's very, I mean, it's very interesting, because a tangent that's relevant is that the title of my book, Someday I'll Find You, comes from a Noel Coward song, In Private Lives. Someday I'll find you, moonlight behind you, true to the dream you are dream. That's it. So there you go, a little bit of singing for you. It's from the play Private Lives, actually, his most famous play. And there's a Noel Coward connection to my family, because my father flew Noel Coward later on, after he'd been shot down and was considered too old to be a fighter pilot anyway, because he was 25. He moved into transport and was doing all sorts of planes around, and he was assigned to fly Noel Coward around, because they said, "Oh, Humph, you're a son of an actor, aren't you? You're an actor. You fly him around." So they got on quite well. Later on, my father sent Noel Coward a play that he'd written, and Noel Coward, because he said, "Oh, dear boy, if you're a writer, send me a play." And Noel Coward wrote this letter back, which my father framed and kept, and I still have it somewhere. And he eviscerated this play. Oh my God! His first line was, "My dear Peter, be prepared. I'm going to be rather beastly to you. I didn't like your play very much," and on. "I'm going to be rather beastly to you" is the greatest opening line ever. But he went on to say, and this is apropos of what we were just talking about, he said, "Above all, let your characters dictate your plot, rather than your plot dictate your characters." And that's, what we're talking about here. That's what Diana talks about, and you and I know. Every time you try to corral a character into doing something that you need them to do, it's mostly not going to work. And that doesn't mean, one of my favorite words in writing is oscillation. You oscillate between character and plot, between research and character, between structure and character and plot, and all the things you oscillate between. And your brain is sort of keeping track of all that, if you just allow your brain to do what it does, which I always talk about. I'm writing actually a series of blogs right now on Medium, which is, and I did it because I've been traveling for 3 months through Europe, and I thought I'd like to write. So I started writing these essays, travel essays, basically, about experiences in places. And but now I'm back home. I thought, well, what journeys do I still want to take? And I thought, well, maybe it's time for me to start writing down some of the stuff I believe about writing. So I'm writing a series of blogs. So if anyone's interested in those, they're on Medium. Oh, really? They're on Medium, which is the great sort of. It was founded by the guy who was co-founder of Twitter, actually, but he wanted longer form writing, and so there are essays on everything. There's amazing writers on there, and you get followers, and people can subscribe to you, and then get, every week you can get an essay. So I'm starting to do that, so I'm fascinated by process of writing, particularly, and you asked about the 20-second novel, why I waited so long. I had to wait so long to write this one because it was just too personal.
Yeah, you have to wait for the right timing. Well, I'm so glad you did. Okay, so now you are, among other things I don't even know about, you're an author, you're an actor, you're a swordsman, and a teacher. And what struck me part of the book was the dialogue, how natural it was, and I wondered if that had to do, maybe, do you think that the smoothness of it, the ease of it, might have come partially from your acting? And I'm thinking about particularly with the men when they were about to go into battle, and they're talking to each other, and they're just talking man stuff, but it just felt so real. And I wondered if that was similar to how acting might be, or which one of them might help each other.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, my background as an actor is something that informs my storytelling. I mean, I really define myself. There are all those labels, but I just call myself a storyteller because I tell other people's stories as an actor. I tell my own stories as either a playwright or a novelist, or more recently as a sort of essayist.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I began writing plays because I never thought I thought a novel is just too big for me to tackle. But plays I kind of understand, and that's what I got my first break, and I won an award for writing a play, and then that play was produced. So they actually gave me $500. I was paid to be a writer. I couldn't believe it. And then another play was commissioned. So, but yes, I mean, I love dialogue. I love. Because I think it's so interesting because you can both reveal and conceal a character with dialogue, and it's great for subtext, and it's very active, and that's the other thing. I say character in action. Obviously, there's M dashes between in action, because character in action would be really dull. Character in action is what I do, and there are a few things more active than a good dialogue scene. Because people want something. They want to. They're prepared to reveal a certain amount, particularly when they're getting to know each other, a certain amount about themselves, or they have, as in the case you mentioned, these people know each other very well, so they have an ease of banter with each other. That's so. I think when Billy and Ilse are first getting to know each other, there's a lot of, particularly from Ilse, because she can reveal very little about why she's in London now, and what she's about to do. And Billy is obviously fascinated by her beauty and her persona, everything about her. But he also knows that he's got to tread slightly warily because he's not getting the answers he wants. So that's a different kind of. It's a slightly more, not stilted exactly, but it's more carefully. You have to. Whereas the pilots are all very easy with each
Yes.
other.
Yeah, I enjoyed them. And I just have a favorite, like when we talk about researching the little things, and this isn't, you don't have to comment on this at all, but I loved it. You had one scene where Billy is waking up and he has an oily rag on his face to block out the mosquitoes. And I thought this is just such a priceless little piece of information. Okay, moving on. So you are all of those things, labeled or not, but there's something else that you were going to tell me about this cover.
Oh, well, yes, that Jack Absolute cover, that is me on the cover. I should face this way. Can you see the sort of nose and everything there? I mean, obviously not my hair. Yeah, I mean that was fun when we were going to talk a bit about covers. My publishers came to me because Jack was my third novel, so this is back in 2003 maybe, and they said, right, so no, 2004 probably. We've hired this really good cover designer called Henry Stedman, and he likes to take photographs of characters but then transform them into paint. It looks like paintings, and they want a photograph of Jack Absolute, and we decided you should be the model for it. And I said to them, is that because I'd do it for free and you wouldn't have to pay anyone? And they said, yeah, essentially, yes, that's right. So anyway, so I donned the red coat again, because the thing about Jack Absolute is that he's a character from a play. I played Jack Absolute in the play The Rivals by Sheridan. It's an 18th century romantic comedy, almost a farce, actually. It's a great fun play. And I loved playing Jack Absolute. So years later, because I didn't become a novelist for 20 years after, no, 15, 16 years after that, I played that. I thought, that's what I'd like to write about. I'd like to be Jack again. And so my publishers agreed. And so then, yeah, we went and photographed it. And Henry, who I've worked with a number of times now, is, again, a researcher, scrupulous about all that. We got the correct uniform, the correct weapons, everything. And then we went and shot it in his famous father's gazebo. His father is Ralph Steadman, the famous caricaturist and cartoonist, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and all that. And he lives in an 18th century house in Kent. So we went and shot that particular shot in Ralph Steadman's gazebo. And then Henry doctored it all up. But it gave rise to some odd moments, like at the International Toronto IFOA International Festival of Authors, standing at a publisher's party with this giant poster of Jack, and I'm having a beer talking to someone, and I look up and I go, oh my goodness, there I am, just like time looping around. So.
Well, I'm awfully glad you're a storyteller because you have great stories. You have so many great stories. So the new book, let me see that cover again, because that's stunning. That's going to be all in fronts of stores very soon. It's so pretty. So how much input do you have with covers? I have like nothing, but
well, it's interesting. I've always managed to retain a fair bit of input. I mean, you have no right of veto as an author, but I think a sensible publisher will know that you might not know the marketing side so well as them, but you do know the story side better than anyone. And what are the themes of this story? Because we all know a cover needs to convey really the theme of the story. Because that's what a person, without going, oh, I'm going to find a book with a theme, but they're going to be drawn to something that obviously has some sort of theme to it. And so with this one, they came up with a cover, and it was just dull. It was historically wrong as well, because they had this. And I'm not. By the way, I think these people are very talented, and I'm not criticizing them for seizing an image and stuff. But the main figure in it was in an army uniform, and Billy Koch is obviously a Canadian fighter pilot. And there was this couple who were walking hand in hand down a cobblestone street. For all intents and purposes, just happily in love. And that's not the story. The story is love, but love torn apart. Love, you find it and then you lose it straight away because of war. And so I said, look, I'm sorry, but this cover doesn't have the emotion, doesn't have the tension of two people about to part, possibly going off possibly to their deaths. It has to have that. We have to have threat. We have to have emotion. And they went, oh yeah, all right. And then they came back with this. And that to me does it. You see, I think that couple there are I think this is them about to say goodbye. And there's war behind. There's clouds. There's smoke. There's planes, there's all sorts of stuff. So I was very pleased when they came back with this, because as we know, they say don't judge a book by its cover, but that's exactly what people do when they walk into a bookstore. So
you have to, right? You always go with your sight first. So yeah. Well, I could chat with you forever. I just am captivated with these conversations. I will have to cut it up, but maybe we'll have to do another one of these sometime, and maybe you'll just have to write number 23 really fast so that we can talk about sometime. But
all right.
Thank you so much for doing this with me today. And thank you for that book. Because again, once I get the hard copy of it, that's what I'm doing for 2 days. I'm just going to sit there and enjoy it. So.
Oh, that is so great to hear, Genevieve. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, and I'm glad that we got to talk about it. I'm very excited about the book. Obviously, I'm going to be very intrigued to see how people receive it. It's not out till June the 6th, which seems an appropriate date to me. It was D-Day was June the 6th, so another war-related thing. And my father flew into France shortly after D-Day to try to work out ways of landing planes that could take the wounded out, actually. Wow. So he was trying to land on fields and stuff. So that seems appropriate. But yeah, it's going to be interesting, and a book that's this personal. And I'll be able to go around and do my show and tell. Just one last quick story. More show and tell here. I was in Norway recently, and for Christmas actually, and because I am half Norwegian, obviously, and my mother's last surviving cousin, so obviously quite a bit younger than her, is called Elizabeth Holter, and she, her nephew was a Norwegian Spitfire pilot, and he was killed in Holland in 1944, and a local girl decided to keep keep where the plane crashed as a sort of war memorial. And years later, people picked up on this, and they opened a sort of shrine there. And Jens Stoltenberg, head of NATO, came to the opening. Anyway, Elizabeth, when I was in Norway, said, "Oh, I've got something for you," and she gave me a piece of his Spitfire.
Wow.
That was dug up from that site. Yeah, so that's a little bit of the Spitfire itself. So so this is my I've got another family connection in that my second cousin,
Yes.
was a Spitfire
Yeah.
pilot. So.
It's looks just like this.
Aha!
This is what I'm working with right now.
Ooh, cool.
It's actually pretty. So yeah, there we've got. That could have come right off the fuselage there. Just think.
It could indeed. Yeah, they're beautiful wings, the Spit, hey?
Yes, those are. Yes, I'm working on stuff with that right now, and
Are you? Oh, great.
my husband is so happy because I am now like, let's go on a plane. We have to go to. I want to be on a hurricane. I want to be on the. And he's thinking, I never thought you would want to do it.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, that's the great thing about research. If you can do it on your feet, and actually go to places or have experiences. I've done tons of that, over the years. It's been such good fun. Yeah, you really. I sat in the cockpit of a Spitfire at RAF Hendon not long ago, so it was great.
We had one at it was a local aviation center here or in Edmonton area, but it was a reconstructed and it was 3/4 the size, so I kind of squeezed in there, but it was still neat to be in front of that instrument panel and see what these guys would have looked at. And
Yeah.
There's nothing like hands-on.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So
all right, I suppose we're gonna have to sign off now, but
another time for more.
yes, thank you very, very much, Chris, and I wish you all the best with this book, and everybody on this page needs to go and get one because yeah, I think that's going to be probably my Christmas presents for everybody this year.
Oh, well, great. That sounds good.
Yes, well, thank you very much again, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much, and to you too.